Hello everyone, my name is John Steinle, and I'm going to lead you down the dusty trail today to illuminate some of the facts about Colorado's involvement in the Civil War. The Civil War, you say? What in the world could Colorado have had to do with the Civil War? Well, I hope to illuminate that. A couple of years ago I wrote a book called Colorado in the Civil War. And that pretty much resulted from about 25 years of involvement with different reenactment and living history groups here in Colorado. I was a member of the 1st Colorado Volunteers Union reenactment group, and I was also a member of the 1st Texas Confederate group. So I went both ways, and I learned a lot about Colorado in the Civil War and what happened here and how heavily the territory was involved in the Union war effort especially. So we're going to go through a program today that I call Faces of Colorado's Civil War. And if you're interested in who this face is, it happens to be Private Gordon Smart, who enlisted in the 2nd Colorado Volunteers in May of 1862 and served all throughout the rest of the Civil War, only being discharged in September of 1865, months after the war was supposedly over. So thank you, Private Gordon Smart, for your service. So here we go into Faces of Colorado's Civil War. This is the face of William Greenberry Russell, usually called just Green Russell. And among those who sparked the Great Colorado Gold Rush of 1858 to 1861, Green Russell and his brothers Oliver and Levi hailed from Georgia. And this is indicative of the fact that mostly Southerners initiated and expanded the Gold Rush. This is the face of Denver, then called Denver City, in 1861. Colorado Territory was created by Congress in February of 1861, about 2 months before the Civil War began. The 1860 census showed about 31,000, quote, white and free black, unquote, people in the territory. And of course, that didn't include the Native American people of different tribes who were spread out all over Colorado Territory. This is William Gilpin. Gilpin was an experienced frontiersman who was appointed Territorial Governor of Colorado by President Lincoln. When he arrived in May of 1861, he was alarmed at the number of Confederate sympathizers in Colorado Territory, and he took emergency steps to control them. This is Camp Weld. Governor Gilpin had a large military base, Camp Weld, constructed a short distance south of Denver City. To pay for this and organizing the 1st Colorado Volunteer Infantry, Gilpin issued, quote, site drafts, unquote, payable by the United States government. Unfortunately, this would prove his downfall. Henry Hopkins Sibley, a former U.S. Army officer, joined the Confederacy and recruited a 3,000-man unit known as the Sibley Brigade. With these troops, he defeated Union troops at the Battle of Val Verde in southern New Mexico and captured Albuquerque and Santa Fe, pronouncing that New Mexico was now the Confederate territory of New Mexico. This is Theodore Dodd. Dodd reportedly attended West Point, and when the war began, he volunteered for and commanded an independent Colorado infantry company sent to Fort Craig, New Mexico. This is James Ford, originally from Ohio. Ford also volunteered, and he was appointed commander of an independent infantry company, just like Theodore Dodd. After training at Fort Garland, he and his men were ordered to report to Fort Union, New Mexico. Governor Gilpin recruited a full federal volunteer infantry regiment of 1,100 men, the 1st Colorado Volunteer Infantry. And this image shows part of Company G, 1st Colorado, drilling on the street in Empire City, Colorado Territory in 1861. And this is John M. Chivington. When the 1st Colorado Volunteer Infantry was formed by Governor Gilpin, Chivington, a Methodist minister, was offered the post of chaplain. He refused, saying he wanted a fighting command, and he was appointed major in the regiment. Although the Union Army was defeated at the Battle of Valverde in southern New Mexico, the Colorado troops under Theodore Dodd had the distinction of repelling the only actual Lancer charge of the Civil War by the 5th Texas of the Sibley Brigade. The battles of Glorieta Pass and Apache Canyon, fought March 26 through 28, 1862, were the turning point of the New Mexico campaign. Though Union forces were forced back at the main battle near Pigeons Ranch, 1st Colorado soldiers under Chivington circled behind the Confederates and destroyed their wagons and all their supplies, forcing them to retreat to Texas. This is Louisa Canby. As Confederate wounded were brought into Santa Fe after the Battle of Glorieta Pass, Louisa Canby, the wife of Edward Canby, the Union commander in New Mexico, organized the ladies of Santa Fe to gather blankets, medical supplies, clothing, and ambulance wagons to help them. The Confederate soldiers dubbed her the Angel of Santa Fe. This is Colonel Jesse Leavenworth, commander of the 2nd Colorado Volunteer Infantry, which was formed early in 1862. The 3rd Regiment of Volunteer Infantry was organized shortly afterward, and they were led by Colonel James Ford, the former commander of an independent infantry company. Colonel Leavenworth and some of the 2nd Colorado Volunteers were sent to Fort Larned in Kansas to help guard the Santa Fe Trail. Leavenworth turned out to be really good at negotiating and dealing with the local tribes like the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Kiowa, and he was very successful at keeping the peace along the Santa Fe Trail. Here we have Lieutenant William Matthews and an unidentified Union Native American sergeant. The majority of the 2nd Colorado under Lieutenant Colonel Dodd was ordered to the Indian Territory, which we now call Oklahoma. There they fought alongside the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry, 1st African American unit to see combat in the Civil War, and Federal Native American troops. Their opponents, they fought against Confederate Native Americans led by Colonel Stanwady. In August 1863, Confederate guerrillas from Missouri, led by William Quantrill, attacked and burned the town of Lawrence, Kansas, killing almost 200 citizens. Rebel bushwhackers caused tremendous damage and disruption to Union forces in Kansas and Missouri. In 1862 and 63, Colorado Territory lost 2 of the most prominent leaders during the Civil War fight for the Union. One was Colonel Jesse Leavenworth, who was discharged dishonorably from the Army for organizing and recruiting an artillery battery without permission from the War Department. This decision was later reversed by the Judge Advocate General of the Army, and he was reinstated as a full colonel. And by the way, the artillery battery, which had been disbanded by the War Department, was found to be necessary, and it was later reorganized. And the other leader that was lost was Territorial Governor William Gilpin. When the site drafts that he had used to fund the 1st Colorado and Camp Weld and other war preparations were sent to Washington, D.C., there was a furor because they had not been authorized by the U.S. Treasury or the War Department. Now, later on, these site drafts were paid to the merchants and suppliers, but in the meantime, the outcry against Governor Gilpin was so strong that President Lincoln had to replace him with John Evans, who became the territorial governor. We have some new roles, new identities, and a new unit fighting on behalf of Colorado. By early 1864, the 2nd and 3rd Colorado Volunteer Infantry were combined to form the 2nd Colorado Volunteer Cavalry. Mounted horsemen, moving quickly, proved much more able to chase the Confederate guerrillas in Missouri and Kansas and to defend against the Native American tribes here in Colorado Territory. James Ford became the colonel of the new unit and Theodore Dodd the lieutenant colonel. The new unit was ordered to Kansas and Missouri to suppress the Confederate bushwhackers. Here we have Jesse James and William Clark Quantrill. Quantrill was one of the most notorious Confederate guerrilla leaders. Jesse James and other guerrillas committed numerous atrocities and were skillful fighters, but were effectively counterattacked by the Colorado troops. Here we have Major General Sterling "Pap" Price and Captain William McLean. In the fall of 1864, Pap Price invaded Missouri with 12,000 Confederate troops, hoping to recapture the state for the Confederacy. The 2nd Colorado was among many Union units opposing Price, along with Colorado's Independent Artillery Battery commanded by William McLean, the other gentleman shown here. The outnumbered Union forces were forced back to the Kansas City vicinity. In October, Union forces finally gathered enough troops to defeat Pap Price in the Battle of Westport and Mine Creek and force him to retreat back to Arkansas. By the way, this Battle of Westport is also referred to as the Gettysburg of the West, just as the Battle of Glorieta Pass is often. Fort Sedgwick, Fort Lyon, Fort Collins, Fort Morgan, and Fort Garland were among the federal posts built in Colorado just before or during the Civil War. Fort Collins, Fort Morgan, Fort Lyon, and Fort Garland became the nuclei of present-day cities and communities. Back in Colorado, in April 1864, a series of armed clashes between Cheyenne warriors and Colorado troops began. Each side accused the other of instigating the fighting. An important Cheyenne chief, Lean Bear, was shot by the troops while waving papers presented to him when he visited with President Lincoln the year before. The murder of the Hungate family near Denver in June 1864 was followed by a season of summer raids by the Cheyenne and Arapaho that spread fear and panic throughout Colorado Territory. In August 1864, Territorial Governor John Evans issued a proclamation authorizing Colorado citizens to attack and kill any native people they thought might be hostile. He received permission to recruit a 3rd Colorado Volunteer Cavalry Regiment to serve only for 100 days. In the fall of 1864, Major Ned Winecoop, who was the commanding officer at Fort Lyon in Colorado Territory, was contacted by several Cheyenne and Arapaho chiefs who said they wanted to talk peace. He met with them under very dangerous circumstances. Many of the young warriors wanted to attack and kill him. However, the chiefs such as Black Kettle were able to quiet them down, and he was able to arrange a meeting between Governor Evans and Colonel Chivington in Denver in September of 1864. These are the faces of peace chiefs who met with Governor Evans and Colonel Chivington in Denver on September 28, 1864. This photo was taken right after the meeting. The meeting, known as the Camp Weld Council, failed to offer any real resolution to the hostilities. Those chiefs who agreed to Colonel Chivington's demands moved with their people down to the area around Fort Lyon in southeastern Colorado. On November 29, 1864, About 700 Colorado troops led by Colonel John M. Chivington attacked Cheyenne and Arapaho villages along Big Sandy Creek in southeastern Colorado. Perhaps as many as 230 people in the villages were killed, their bodies scalped and mutilated. This became known as the Sand Creek Massacre. Morse Coffin was a Boulder County farmer who joined the 3rd Colorado Volunteer Cavalry, Company D, in 1864. Never expressing regret for his part in the Sand Creek Massacre, he later wrote, quote, "The idea was very general, that a war of extermination should be waged, that neither age nor sex should be spared, and one often heard the expression that nits make lice," unquote. Here's George Bent and his wife Magpie. George's father was longtime fur trader William Bent, and his mother was Owl Woman from a very important Cheyenne family. George was with his mother's people at Sand Creek when the massacre happened, and he was wounded by the troops. Later, he wrote numerous letters and articles about his life as a Cheyenne warrior, the history and culture of the Cheyenne people, and the truthful story of the atrocities at Sand Creek. This is Captain Silas Sewell of the 1st Colorado. He refused to allow his men to fire at Sand Creek. Later, he testified against atrocities committed by Chivington's men. Only a few weeks after his marriage in April 1865, he was murdered on the streets of Denver, and it was widely thought that his killing was due to the fact that he had testified against Chivington. The Sand Creek Massacre united the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Lakota to seek revenge. In January 1865, they attacked Julesburg, Colorado twice, looting and burning the entire town. The massacre ensured that warfare in Colorado would continue long after the end of the Civil War. The Overland Trail was a V-shaped trail running from the main Oregon Trail to the north, down along the South Platte River to the Denver area, and then back up to the main Oregon Trail in Wyoming. And the eastern half of the Overland Trail during 1865 was ravaged by numerous Cheyenne and Arapaho and Lakota raids, attacking, burning, and destroying many of the stagecoach stops and ranches that were located along the trail. In effect, the trail was closed for months to passenger traffic, which was vitally important to the survival of Colorado Territory because of these raids following the Sand Creek Massacre. Fort Chambers was one of many settler forts built as protection against anticipated Native American raids by local settlers. The adobe structure was located east of Boulder near Valmont Road. Company D of the 3rd Colorado Volunteer Cavalry mustered in there. Fort Wicked, or Godfrey's Ranch, was only one of many fortified stagecoach stops along the Overland Trail. The adobe fortification withstood a major Cheyenne attack in January of 1865. And by the way, in 1860s slang, wicked was kind of the same thing as saying badass. So that's why Mr. Godfrey called his ranch Fort Wicked. Samuel Adams was among several dozen African American men who served with the Colorado troops as cooks, teamsters, wagoners, etc. He was listed on the regimental rolls and received a Union Army pension. This photograph is owned by the Palace of the Governor's collection in Santa Fe, and I really believe this is the first time that an image of any of the African Americans who served with the Colorado troops during the Civil War has been shown to the public. Fort Garland, Colorado's only surviving Civil War fort, is owned and operated by History Colorado. The one surviving building from Pigeons Ranch, focus of the fighting at the Battle of Glorieta Pass, is just off I-25 on the way to Santa Fe. Fort Union, New Mexico, and Fort Larned, Kansas, are only two of the many Civil War locations that are now National Historic Sites. Colorado troops were stationed at both locations. The Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site, a lonely site in desert country in southeastern Colorado, commemorates the saddest day in Colorado history. And this site is also owned and managed by the National Park Service. The Riverside Cemetery grave of Silas Soule, a hero amid bloody brutality, is always decorated with flowers and mementos. Spruce McCoy Baird was a Confederate supporter in New Mexico, later becoming colonel of the 4th Regiment of the Arizona Brigade Confederate Army. After the Civil War, he moved to Colorado, was a successful attorney in Golden and Trinidad, and is buried in Golden Cemetery. Well, I hope we proved to you today that Colorado Territory, far from being an isolated individual place during the years of the Civil War, was actually massively involved in the Civil War, especially in the Union war effort. And troops from Colorado were instrumental, vital, in preserving the southwestern part of the United States for the Union and preventing the Confederacy from taking over that whole region of the country. So we can honestly say that the Union soldier from Colorado was a humble instrument in a great cause.